As we're like identifying our sweet spots, we're figuring out what's comfortable for us, we're allowing ourselves to be truthful in front of the cameras, right?
Lesson 6.
The Safety-Entertainment Tightrope.
Usually what feels safest for you will be least entertaining for audiences, and vice versa. So while we try our best to protect ourselves, there will be many situations in which the producers will want you to be more vulnerable because that's going to bring excitement and intrigue to the show. Saying that you resent something that a castmate said, for instance, could provide a juicy plot line, but also end up being a source of strife when the show is released. The safe choice tends to be simple and boring, whereas the dangerous choice is provocative.
But this doesn't always have to be the case. When we established your off-the-table topics in Lesson 1, we simultaneously figured out what topics were on the table. These on-the-table topics, of course, are the ones that you have no problem talking about. And chances are that at least one of your on-the-table topics will be off the table for most people. From personal finances and sex to religion, politics, and even feelings, there are so many topics that most people, but not everyone, are uncomfortable talking about in a public context. We call this your personal sweet spot. The topics that feel comfortable and safe for you, but could still feel provocative and entertaining to the general audience.
By identifying your sweet spot, you'll avoid feeding into toxic he said, she said narratives, and instead highlight what makes you a truly unique person. Consider your archetype and which of your on-the-table topics could satisfy the production without compromising your sense of integrity.
When asked to talk about someone else during interviews, you can keep things safe and entertaining by focusing on your feelings rather than casting judgment on the person. Use I feel statements instead of they are whenever possible, and allow yourself to be vulnerable with the feelings that come up as you answer questions. And if you ever feel forced to decide between safety and entertainment, remember that there's always a third option: breaking the fourth wall and pointing back to the TV show. By reminding the audience that none of this takes place in a vacuum and that people are bound to make mistakes when faced with such intense pressure, you're giving yourself and your castmates the grace you deserve.
So Bennett, what's your personal sweet spot?
I think identifying a sweet spot is very difficult to do because what we're talking about is ultimately identifying the things that feel totally natural and comfortable for us that might not for other people. Yeah. So really, a lot of the process of identifying a sweet spot is about knowing how other people feel and knowing what is conventional when for me, it feels weird, right? So in my case, the most obvious example I could use is the fact that I wear a dress to sleep, and I'm a man, right? Yeah. And that is, such a simple thing that to me feels totally reasonable and rational. It's very comfortable. It's very soft. I love sleeping in it. Yeah. But for whatever reason, that is in our world unusual or unconventional, right? So that becomes a sweet spot, right? Where I'm totally happy to do something. I don't care if people see me doing this at all. In fact, I find it amusing that other people find it strange. Yeah. And, I'm able to use that to my advantage, right?
I feel like the social ramifications of a black man wearing a dress on to bed every night, I wouldn't come back from that. Never. I would never come back from that, So I think it's a perfect example of a sweet spot working for one person and not working for
Totally, yeah. What's your sweet spot, Miles?
A lot of people don't feel comfortable talking about mental health.
Yeah.
And mental health, race, those are things that I feel like are a part of my identity and part that I'm constantly talking about. Mm-hmm. But other folks may not feel as comfortable speaking about. And it felt like a very low risk thing for me to say hey, I'm struggling, I have mental health struggles, et cetera. Mm-hmm. And could see the benefit for me after the show, right? Is this is a topic that we need to talk about and people need to be aware of. And so me being able to talk about that was okay, cool. Worst case scenario, some people have a stigma toward mental health. Mm-hmm. And that's already exists. And so like, how do we talk about that more intentionally, you know? And so I think that was probably like a spot that I was like, I feel comfortable in this lane because it was like very low risk for me and high reward.
You know, we were in a very specific context where, you know, we were in a group setting on a film set, and you know, we were in the midst of Black Lives Matter protests. George Floyd had just been killed. And you broached the topic amongst everyone. And even though that wasn't in my sweet spot, it still felt, I was still very grateful to you for taking the time and putting in the energy to address it and bring it up. So I do think there are also contexts in which, you know, we're warning people to be aware of other people's sweet spots, right? I wouldn't say like, hey, Miles, I'm wearing a dress to bed. I got you this dress. You should wear it, right? That would be inconsiderate and rude for me to do. Yeah. But like what you did in your case, I was very grateful for. I thought it was very helpful. I thought it was very important. Yeah. So there are contexts in which something that's off the table for someone may still be something they're willing to explore if you are initiating that conversation.
And I think in that context in particular, one, it was something that was really important to me at that time. And like, I wanted to acknowledge to everyone in the room, but then also to like the camera that I'm not presenting my best self right now. Right. And that felt safe for me to be able to say. And then explain why in a larger context, like how hard it is for me to be in this space as a Black man while we're talking about Black men dying, right? And I think what made me feel safe to do so, because I didn't know if race was your personal sweet spot or not, right? But we had conversations off camera beforehand around that, right? And so I felt comfortable enough in the way in our relationship that you were able to talk about it in a way that made me feel safe and feel comfortable, and that you had an awareness of it, where it didn't feel like I would be putting you in a position where you would not have felt comfortable or be able to present yourself in a way that would be comfortable for you.
Yeah.
It's tricky because when we talk about identity, right, like there's a lot of different, like there's a lot that feels like it can go wrong. But then also a lot that can go right if you're connected with the people that you're on cast with or in community with.
I love that point that like you can establish, you can actively work to establish what is on the table for your castmates through conversations that happen off camera. Yeah. And that through those conversations, you can then kind of figure out, okay, this person might not feel comfortable like initiating this conversation or broaching this topic, but we can talk openly, honestly, and thoughtfully about it together. And therefore it feels okay to broach it in front of a camera.
I was literally talking to my dad on the phone before we got on set, and I was like, hey, I'm shooting with Bennett, whatever. He was like, oh, Bennett. He was like, I hate that I haven't met him in person, but like, tell him I said, what's up, right? And so my dad has such a positive like connection to you. And like, I want to meet him, and like, he's such an interesting guy and like very positive, and he's never met you before.
Yeah,
right?
Totally.
I mean, and obviously I'll probably talk to you more than he's seen on the show. So he's like, my son thinks positively of him. So I also feel positively. But also it's like my dad sees you as this character.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm like, you know, I'm a fun guy, but I'm way more cynical than I'm made out to be on the show, you know? And I don't think that's necessarily a reflection of my sweet spot so much as it was, well, I think maybe it is, right? Because like wearing a dress, that's like, and showing it to the camera, that's a playful thing, right? So that like my sweet spot there does also happen to be like fun and playful. I think it's a combination of those sweet spots, but also, you know, I guess, you know, another example, some of it is fashion in general, right? Like I swam in my underpants for whatever reason.
Did you?
Yeah, I did. During the honeymoon, I swam in my underpants for whatever reason. That never once occurred to me as being strange.
Really?
No, I'm just in my boxers. What's the difference? It's not a big deal, right? Yeah. But and yet somehow that was, you know, that fascinated or excited or titillated people in this weird way that I never would have seen coming, you know?
Yeah.
So I guess one of my sweet spots there is just fashion in general, and the things I was like, willing to wear that struck other people as bizarre. And that fed into this archetype, this playful, silly archetype that I was fulfilling. And so like all of these things, the sweet spot, the archetype, and the intentions, right? Since I was there for an adventure in the first place, they all kind of started to converge and create this persona that was like extremely silly, gregarious, whatever it may be.
I think it's interesting because your archetype allowed for me in scenes with you to feel like I could be more silly, you know, that I could be more playful, that I could like explore some of the more just like some of the barriers of my off the tables, like that I didn't think about before. Like I wasn't wearing a dress on TV. I'm not gonna wear a dress off TV, but I do think that like I can't remember any specific scenes off the top of my head, but like I felt safe to be able to like be a little bit more courageous because of that's the space that they kind of painted you in, and also how you presented on camera.
And that's fully reciprocated. I wouldn't have during the retreat been able to talk about matters of racial justice of my own accord, you know, in such a public context. Obviously, I think it's important to talk about it with my friends, but that gave me the courage and permission to like engage in that conversation in such a public context. And I similarly was grateful for that.
For sure.
And I mean, I think it's worth noting as we're having this conversation, right, that we are all of these choices we're making as we're like identifying our sweet spots, we're figuring out what's comfortable for us, we're allowing ourselves to be truthful in front of the cameras, right? And as we're being truthful, we're actually creating more entertaining, interesting content, right? We're finding kind of the intersection, the overlap between who we are and what the show wants us to be. And in the process, we're able to be our fullest selves, our truest selves, and we're serving the narrative, right? And it creates very entertaining, very often interesting, engaging content.
Being able to be authentic selves, I think one of the cool perks like after the show is when people meet me, they're like, one, they generally already feel positively towards me and like connected to me in a certain way. But then when they get to know me further, they're like, oh, like you really are that person, you know? And I'm like, yeah, that's me, you know? And when people are appreciating you for you, that's a good feeling. Like, I don't think we don't intend to go out there and get the sense of validation from everybody. But at the same time, it does feel good to be affirmed in like, hey, you're just as cool as I thought you were, or even more interesting than I thought you were, right? And I think that, and that's nice to be like seen as who you actually are. Breaking the fourth wall isn't some brilliant new idea. Reality TV personalities do it all the time. But all too often, people choose to be antagonistic or rude when pointing back to the cameras. This is always a huge mistake. Remember, production has the final say over everything. If you choose to go to battle with them when you break the fourth wall, there's no doubt you'll come out on the losing end. That's why it's important to remain friendly and playful when pointing back to the cameras.
Here's a useful anecdote about breaking the fourth wall. During one of my first OTFs, I had a producer say to me, "Hey, you're really good at this. You're so honest and real, and you really let us see what you're experiencing. I just want to give you a piece of advice. We really want to catch you in your natural state, so try not to point out the camera so much." I responded to this by saying, "Hey, I'm trying not to censor myself in any way, and that means I need to fully and openly acknowledge the conditions in which all of this is going on. If I ignore the cameras, which are obviously having an influence on who I am, how I behave in this moment, there's a good chance I'll also start ignoring other elements of how I'm feeling." So acknowledging the cameras and keeping the cameras within available topics of conversation is a way of making sure that you are also open to everything going on at once.
Here's an activity to help you practice this. Verbally answer the following questions while keeping yourself safe and still digging deep. Question 1. What do you most love about this experience? What do you like the least about this experience? Has anything covered in this program made you feel uncomfortable? Fill in the blank. I'm afraid of
Now that we've talked about the Safety-Entertainment Tightrope, we're actually going to go behind the scenes and talk about difficult situations that happen when the cameras aren't necessarily rolling and how you can negotiate terms and navigate difficult situations with the production team.